Hey everybody, welcome to the podcast with me, Jonathan Puddle. This is episode 2. Thank you for tuning in. On the show today, I interviewed Laura Solberg. Laura is the director of the Elevation Project, which is a partnership between Youth for Christ Rwanda and Greater Vancouver Youth Unlimited. And it's all about connecting young people in Vancouver with young people in Rwanda who actually, while on the outside they may not have a lot in common, what they discover is the challenges that they're each facing actually bring them together and form a bond between people. So Laura is really passionate about youth work, international development, a whole bunch of stuff, and she really loves to see people step into the fullness of who they were created to be. So Laura's created a resource, along with a few other folks, that helps churches understand issues of poverty and helps church leaders train their congregations in understanding systemic poverty, as well as understanding how we all experience poverty. I don't want to give too much away right here, but I'm just going to say, if you think that there are poor people somewhere else and you're like a privileged person, while that's true in a certain sense, every single one of us experiences poverty of some form or another. So that's my teaser, and let me get out of the way, and here we go. Hey, Laura, how are you doing today?
I am doing pretty good. Pretty cold out here in Vancouver, but pretty good.
Yeah. Cool. I'm really glad that you could make the time that we could connect here and talk about poverty and justice and how we as humans living on this planet can interface with those issues, interface with one another, and build a framework for understanding poverty. So can you talk to me a bit about that word? I think for a lot of us, poverty, we're going to think, oh, poor people, maybe the homeless, maybe people in the third world. Break down poverty for me. Where does that stop for you?
Yeah, so it's interesting that you say most people think of, the poor or people in Africa or the homeless. And I think that's true in my experience. When you say the word poverty, most people in Canada, your average Canadian, would think of somebody who lacks something, and generally somebody who lacks material goods, like money or food or housing, adequate housing, things like that. But from my perspective and from the work that I've done and the reading that I've done, I would say that those lacks are often a symptom of the real problem, and that poverty itself has a relational basis. And so at the core of the problem is a series of broken relationships, and one of the symptoms of which would be material poverty. But the core of that broken relationship also results in different kinds of poverty that is experienced by different people around the world in very different ways as well. So so that's kind of the basis of my understanding of poverty. And of course, that takes you in very different directions depending on what kind of relationship you're talking about that's being broken or is being impacted, and then what the various symptoms of that is. So it's kind of like the root cause is the broken relationship. And then one of the symptoms that comes from that would be somebody who doesn't have enough food, or is not able to access an education, or doesn't have enough money to adequately support themselves and their families.
Gotcha. Okay, that makes sense. So broken relationships, for me, I'm going to understand that sort of primarily. I'm going to talk about, my wife or my children or my immediate family or my circle of friends. Now, in the Christian circles that I roll in, we also talk a lot about brokenness in relation to our own personal state of wounding, of our need for emotional healing and spiritual counseling and so on. So you're not saying not that. I think it sounds like you're saying that even that emotional wounding and so on that we have is all again a symptom of this fundamental brokenness in our relationships. And when that brokenness plays out on a wider systemic scale, it manifests in these kind of issues like material poverty. Where do these broken relationships start? Talk to me about some of those relationships.
Yeah, so I think it's really interesting that for a long time, as Christians, we have taken a little bit of the world's definition of poverty, actually, and just decided that, that's if it's a lack of material goods, then that's what poverty is. But when you actually speak to people who live in material poverty, they speak of very different things. And I think that begs us to go a little bit deeper. And when you look at the Bible, and you look at the way that God originally intended things to be, the way he created us is to live in relationship with himself, like first and foremost, with other people, with ourselves, like you mentioned, and with the rest of creation. And so from my perspective, and I believe from a biblical perspective, the broken relationships and poverty starts there with those four foundational broken relationships that we see that God created us to have. And so that's why I said before, when you experience brokenness in those various relationships, that it manifests itself in different ways depending on which relationships are the primary ones that you're experiencing brokenness. And I think I would have to say that everybody experiences brokenness in all of those relationships, but depending on the primary source of that brokenness and then the systems that get built out of those four relationships, so like any economic system, a political system, social system, even religious systems, and where you are born in the world will often play a part in that, in the way that the brokenness is experienced. And so this is what I often hear from people who visit less materially fortunate countries, places in Africa or Asia, so in the majority world or the developing world, is that people notice that folks there may not have as much stuff as we do, as much material things as we do, and struggle to get by a little bit more. But one thing that they are materially poor, but one thing that they are often richer in than we in North America are is their community and their relational life, and often their spiritual life as well. And so, and then if we take that and look back at us in Canada, that leads to a realization that, okay, so they may be rich, or maybe rich in these community ways and relational and spiritual ways, poor materially. We are not necessarily, many of us here in Canada, poor materially, but loneliness or the way that our communities are built up would lead me to the conclusion that we experience poverty in more relational ways and community ways and often spiritual ways.
Yeah, totally. That makes a ton of sense to me intuitively. I remember when we moved back to Toronto from living abroad for a few years, where we had really aggressively pursued community. And we moved back into the big city. It's a busy place. Everybody's running, pursuing a material rat race. And I definitely felt a poverty of relationship. I felt like I have a serious lack in my life. So that reframes it then. That means it's not me, the wealthy, and them, the poor. There's a brokenness, I guess, that every one of us shares to some degree.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. And I think you mentioned this earlier when you were talking about like how many people would think about poverty and think about the poor. And I think this changes the posture in which you approach engaging in issues of poverty, because from this perspective of poverty being a symptom of broken relationships and everybody experiencing broken relationships, that basically means that everybody experiences some sort of poverty. And so you enter into engaging in it from, hopefully a much more humble perspective, because it's not those poor people out there, it's all of us experiencing broken relationships in different ways. Yeah,
exactly. So I want to quote you back there. You said poverty is a symptom of broken relationships.
Mm-hmm.
And
I have to give credit. That's something that comes from a long line of work. People, really smart people doing all sorts of research. And that's not an idea that originated with me or my colleagues, but with a long line of study, Christian international development practitioners and scholars, as well as even some from secular points of view as well. So just to make sure credit is given.
well done, Laura. We shall not accuse you of plagiarizing your your aid work. So poverty is a symptom of broken relationships, and the 4 relationships that I think you mentioned earlier were a relationship with God, relationship to ourselves, relationship to those around us, and then relationship to the wider creation. Is that right?
Yes. Yeah.
So talk to me then about justice. And we've got I think that's a really, really strong framework for understanding poverty. How do we approach that?
Yeah, so one conclusion that somebody could come to in looking at poverty from this perspective is this: well, if we're all poor, then what's the point of pursuing more justice in the world? And I think as Christians, we don't have the luxury of using that as an excuse, because it's really clear all throughout the Bible, but particularly in the Old Testament, how much justice and those who experience material poverty, how close they are to the heart of God. The words that form our idea of what justice is in the Bible, the biblical words, the Hebrew words, appear more than 200 times in the Old Testament. And it's just really obvious that while, yes, we are all poor, those who experience material poverty, the orphan, the widow, the immigrant, people like that are very close to the heart of God. And Jesus goes so far as to say in Matthew 25 that he aligns himself with them. And if we, depending on how we treat the least of these, he looks at it as, that's how you treated me. Yeah. And that's a pretty strong statement.
For sure.
Like that means that when we are interacting with those who have less than us, the least of these, God is looking at it as that's how we're interacting with him. Yeah. And if we are created in God's image and called to follow after him and draw near to his heart, I think that we must engage in issues of poverty and justice, material issues of poverty and justice. And I think what's really key in that is that as we engage, those who are less materially poor engage in these issues of poverty and injustice in the world from a holistic perspective, it's in that engaging that our poverty actually receives some healing as well, our relational poverty or our spiritual poverty. For some reason, however it works in God's great plan, when we engage with people who experience poverty in a different way than we do, somehow those areas of relational brokenness seem to be able to experience a different kind of healing than if we just cloister ourselves with people who look like us and experience the world the way that we do.
That is beautiful.
Yeah, and so I think it has something to do with that thinking about it from the perspective of those 4 relationships, as God works his healing in and through us with those who experience poverty in different ways. He's in the process of reconciling all things to himself, of reconciling those relationships. And that's a really exciting thing to be a part of.
Absolutely. That's to me, that is such a picture of the kingdom of God. In our kingdoms, and our principles and systems, it's always, somebody wins. And there's such a control mentality to our normal human frameworks. That is, maybe normal is not the right word. Let's say our broken human frameworks. I'm going to win and you're going to lose, or there's some kind of transaction where we're doing some kind of commerce maybe, and everything in our mind is in those terms. But so often I think we can detect the kingdom of God and godly principles when, like you say, the healing is shared all around, where I'm coming to love on you and to listen to you, and in the process I'm receiving healing for myself. There's something about that really rings true for me. So tell me then about what are some of the big issues. I'm sure a lot of my listeners are going to be pretty familiar with a lot of things, but even as I was reading through some of the things on your website earlier, just the number of children that are dying every day. What are some of the big things just for us to grab onto?
Yeah, I mean, I think that we're in a really interesting time right now, in that we're inundated with more and more images of poverty and suffering all around the world. I mean, we've got different wars going on and children experiencing hunger and lack of education and stuff like that. One thing that is interesting to keep in perspective, though, is that the amount of information we're receiving is more than it ever has been before. And there are actually huge strides being made in alleviating poverty around the world. And so it's not a hopeless situation, but there are situations where in education is a huge one, girls' education in particular, in many countries around the world. It is really challenging for girls to get education, and that is leading to, whole countries are being held back because half the population is not able to access education in the same way. And so I think girls' education is a huge one. One of the things that I think that we in North America don't think as much about, although I think it's changing a little bit, because it's, this idea of social justice is becoming a bit trendy and stuff, which is exciting in some ways. But we don't often think about even just the implications of the clothing that we buy and our purchasing power here in Canada, and how tied up that is in poverty and injustice in other parts of the world. And that, I think, again, it goes back to what you're saying. In our world, there's always a winner and a loser. And when there's systems set up, unjust systems set up, there's always going to be a winner and a loser. And as followers of Christ, the vision of shalom is that actually everybody is living in right relationships. But the reality of the world right now and its brokenness is that our clothes depend on an unjust relationship, where the winners are us with, cheap clothing here in North America, and the losers in this equation, unfortunately, are often people in the factories on the other side of the world that we don't even think about when we're purchasing our clothing. And I think that that's a huge issue today that people are starting to become more aware of, that our purchasing power here in North America actually is connected with the poverty and suffering of people on the other side of the world. And the more awareness we can have of that, and then changing our purchasing patterns. And this is something I'm saying this, speaking to myself as much as anyone, because we're so separate from it, that if we can somehow begin to change our mindsets from this consumeristic driven need to have the newest and the next and the cheapest, that I think that could go a long ways to balancing out a few things and righting those relationships. So that's a huge one for sure. Those are two that come to mind right away, because they're ones that I'm engaged with a little bit. And also, like I said, this consumer mindset is something that in North America, it programs almost everything we do, and we don't even realize it. And so I see that as a huge issue that connects our poverty here in being driven by consumer goods, and the poverty experience in other places as well.
Yeah, absolutely. So there's this tragic irony where we feel that we are materially wealthy, but actually there's a fundamental poverty in our pursuit of material goods. That would be something that we consider so satisfactory to us, indicates a prime measure of our brokenness. And
exactly. If that in itself is a symptom of some sort of brokenness, like why are we looking to consume more and more and more to make ourselves feel better? Like, what is that feeding in us as a society? Exactly.
And then it relies upon a systemic continuation of brokenness in Bangladesh and Burma and wherever else our clothes are being made. Okay, so we touched on something there that's interesting to me regarding Christians. I'm going to paint really broad strokes, and some people are going to be offended, but I find in my experience, a lot of Christians tend to fall into one of two categories: those who are very focused on evangelism and let's say spiritual caring, and then another category that are very focused on social work and on social justice and caring for the here and the now. How have you interacted with that? There's something of a conservative liberal split in there, but it's not quite that cut and dry. So, I mean, I guess the broader question is, what does it mean to be a Christian and making disciples and following Jesus and also being involved in politics and the economy and society and, like you said, stewarding creation?
Right. Yeah. I think that's a great question, because I think that a lot of Christians have often thought that they've had to make a choice between one or the other. And I am a youth worker as well as an international development worker. And one thing that I have seen, and this has been borne out in different studies, is that so many youth and young people these days, the reasons that they are leaving the church and the faith is because of this disconnect. They don't understand this either or thinking. And what I love about going back to this framework, which again is based in the biblical understanding of how we are created, about poverty, is that all four of those relationships are involved. And I just love being able to talk about it from that perspective, because it means that you don't have to choose. It means that they're intimately tied up in each other. And by no means in saying that am I saying that our relationship with God is not important or secondary. That, in fact, that would be the primary relationship that all the others are dependent on. But what I would say, if that one is broken, you're only going to get so far in healing our relationships with other people or with ourselves or with the rest of creation. But the inverse of that is also true. If I think we can only experience so much healing and depth in our relationship with God if we ignore the other relationships as well, because because the injustice in the world and the poverty experienced by people in the world is so close to God's heart that if we aren't somehow engaging that and taking it on, I think we're really missing a big part of God's heart. And so I focus a lot of my attention on this stuff in my work, and I work with youth, and we work internationally in Rwanda with Youth for Christ there. And because my work is focused on poverty and international development and things like that, we do engage in issues of material poverty. I often get asked the question, well, where is the evangelistic portion of your program? And when I get asked that question, inside I laugh a little bit, because I think about the conversations that I have with my Canadian young people, and we talk about God and Jesus all the time, because it is, and I'm working with often young people who would not call themselves Christians, and yet this, because they care about poverty and because they care about the injustice, opens up a door to talk about the heart of God in an amazing way that makes sense to them, and about restoring those relationships. Because what I'm able to do is point out, that feeling in your heart that something isn't right and that the world is broken. That, what if that's God? What if that feeling is coming from God and indicating that you're right, that something is broken, and we all experience poverty in these ways? Where do you see poverty in here? What is your relationship with God like? What is your relationship with your family like? How do you engage with creation and with your own self, and how do you feel about yourself? And so this separation is just not between trying to figure out between, do I tell them about Jesus, or do we work towards healing their external material needs? Is not something that even becomes an issue from this perspective, because it's so rooted and enmeshed and entangled in all of these relationships together. And so to me, it's a really exciting way to draw youth and people closer to the heart of God, in a way that they're already excited for. So I don't know if that answers your question.
Oh, absolutely. That really warms my heart, actually, Laura. and I completely would concur with you that I guess I would basically say our generation and younger is fed up of having to choose one or the other. And we're saying, why can't we believe both? Why can't we care for both? So that's cool that you bring that up, because that's definitely been my experience as well. I want to grind this axe just a tiny bit more, because I'm troubled. I'm troubled by some of what the church has done in missions and aid work. Let me say that I love the church, and I love what the church has done so much of the time. But at the same time, like my wife has a master's in international development, and we've lived in this aid and development work context for a while. And especially within the professional development sector, there's significant pushback against churches doing short-term missions. Not wholesale, but there's a significant concern about churches coming and being like a flash in the pan, caring for souls, but not caring for material problems. So you're really speaking to that and inviting churches to take a holistic approach. I want to read something here from Henry Nouwen that I read just a few months ago that just came up to me as you were sharing that. And he's talking about caring versus curing. He says, our tendency is to run away from the painful realities or to try to change them as soon as possible. But cure without care makes us into rulers, controllers, manipulators, and prevents a real community from taking shape. Cure without care makes us preoccupied with quick changes, impatient and unwilling to share each other's burden. And so cure can often become offending instead of liberating. It is not therefore so strange that cure is not seldom refused by people in need. It is therefore not so strange that cure is not seldom refused by people in need. Not only have individuals refused help when they did not sense a real care, but also oppressed minorities have resisted support, and suffering nations have declined medicine and food when they realized that it was better to suffer than to lose self-respect by accepting a gift out of a non-caring hand. Mm-hmm. I think you touched on that too when you mentioned how a lot of folks in nations that we would consider materially poor talk about other issues. Actually, no, I don't know if you said that. I think that was in one of your videos. You highlighted a quote that people talk about these non-material issues. Do you remember what that quote is? I think it's in one of your.
Yeah, it was a quote from a book, but it's referring to this study that was done in around the 1999-2000 mark by the World Bank, who obviously is in the business of, well, arguably I should say, but in the business of trying to alleviate world poverty, was formed from to rebuild countries after World War II, and then morphed into an organization that provides loans for development in majority world countries. And so they've been working in this field of poverty alleviation for around 50 years at that point, and so millions and billions of dollars of loans, and we're wondering why have we not fixed poverty? So they did this study, and for the first time actually asked people who experienced material poverty, so in the countries that they provided loans to, ask the just regular citizens how they defined poverty, and by and large they defined poverty in relational and social terms. And so they mentioned their material needs often, because obviously that is a huge impact in their lives, but they talked about the shame associated with having to ask for help, or not having the money to pay for school uniforms, or the sense of a lack of dignity. And I think that speaks to that deeper root of brokenness. And we can't deny that with material poverty comes these power dynamics as well. Because we in the West have this stuff, it becomes this, I have what you're lacking, I will give it to you. And while that is, true in some ways, I think what we haven't recognized has been that often our brothers and sisters in other places or that experience material poverty have something that we're lacking as well. But if we come at poverty from a I have, you don't, we take on this sort of God complex, and that can leak into our spirituality as well. And we can think that because we are materially rich, then we must have it all figured out spiritually as well. And that just is not the case at all. Yeah. I think that many people who have traveled to more materially poor countries, almost all of them mention the spiritual health and vitality and richness that they've experienced in other places, and community level richness as well. And so when you don't acknowledge the humanity in somebody, and that they have something to offer as well, you make them an other. You make them something different, something inhuman almost. And nobody likes to be treated like a problem to be fixed or like an object. And so our power dynamics through, the way that economies have grown and colonialism and all that kind of stuff has led to these really deeply ingrained feelings of superiority, and in some cases inferiority or perceived inferiority, where there's people from outside the community, whether it's between nations from North America to somewhere in Africa, or even within our own communities. I live in Vancouver, and the downtown east side is a very rough, poor neighborhood. But the same dynamics hold true. You've got people coming in from richer suburbs coming to the downtown east side, and with no relationship at all, just maybe giving a sandwich out and thinking, and then taking a photo and thinking they've done their part. And that doesn't make people feel good. And if you think about poverty as having a relational core and having to do with those relational dynamics, while you might be, fulfilling a immediate symptom that person may or may not be hungry, you're actually not doing any good on the relational brokenness there. And in fact, it could be said that you're widening that relational brokenness. So actually working against alleviating poverty or increasing poverty. And I think that as Christians, we've fallen into that a little bit because, like I say, this connection with our material status equating to spiritual knowledge, and also, but not always. I mean, a lot of times it does come from really good intentions. So I don't want to say that and paint everybody with this superior brush. I think it does come from good intentions, but if you just look at poverty and you think it's about the material stuff, you're missing the mark, and you're not going to make the difference that you want to. And starting to recognize that poverty has a relational core, but there's also all of these complex systems that are built up around it. And so focusing in on the relational side of things and getting to know people as people, seeing them as people with histories and families and gifts and talents. You would not treat your friend that way. So, and just not getting to know their problems and just shoving a sandwich in their face and taking a photo and posting on your Facebook. So why would we treat our brothers and sisters who experience material poverty like that? So taking the time to get to know people and to recognize our own poverty, I think it's so important as Christians. I actually did some teaching in Rwanda in two different groups about this perspective on poverty, and they loved it. They thought this makes so much sense of things. And so what I was doing is I was encouraging them when they had visitors from North America to think about the ways that their visitors experience poverty and how they can be a part of alleviating the poverty in their materially non-poor friends. And so we talked about this for a little while, and in both groups, somebody immediately said something along the lines of, yes, we might recognize that we have lots to offer, but often visitors don't want to receive what we have to give.
Sure.
And I just thought that spoke so clearly to our attitude and our often attitude of superiority coming in, and how we need to recognize that we're just one part of the puzzle. We're actually all in this together, and our healing comes when we work with people rather than doing things to or for.
That's really good. So there's this needed attitude adjustment, that I think many of us, especially in the West, need to take on and need to understand it's not them and us. It's all us. So I know that you've also started an organization called JustUs. Can you tell us a little bit about how what you guys are doing to try and bring that attitude adjustment?
Yeah, so it's actually a joint project between two organizations, and so it's something that I've been working on with my friends at the Wellspring Foundation for Education, and I work for Youth for Christ here in Vancouver. And JustUs is a joint project between the both of us, because we both realized that there was this. It originated with this realization that there's a huge hunger amongst youth and young people in Canada, and I think around the world, to engage in issues of justice and poverty. And that, I think, comes from, like I said, this seeing the separation in the church often between evangelism and justice work. But it's also existing in like the wider demographic of youth and young people as well, this desire to get involved. And yet there's a bit of a lack of resources to do so well. And so the example that I often use is the 2012, if you're familiar with that, where there's this warlord in Uganda, and they did an amazing social media campaign with a solution attached to it that was an improper solution, but all of these youth got so excited about it and involved because it was something that they could grab onto. Yes. And then when it fell apart, all of these youth and young people were very disenfranchised. And I think that left me feeling like there is something missing here. And in my experience, being able to walk alongside youth as they engage in issues of poverty and injustice, and helping them learn from this relational perspective, introducing them to God through that, or if those who already know God, introducing them to these ideas of these other relationships was hugely transformational in their lives and in the ways that they engaged in issues of poverty and injustice. And so Youth for Christ and the Wellspring Foundation got together and decided to build this curriculum around that to give more youth in Canada the resources to engage well based on some work that we had done in the past. And so the original intention was to train youth workers so that they could be equipped to then train their youth. And so we started with these day-long workshops, which we still do, but we quickly realized that these day-long workshops were very much a bottleneck because it depended on myself and my colleague at the Wellspring Foundation, Andy Harrington, actually traveling to the different places to do the workshops. And so while we had thought about, equipping youth workers so then they can go and equip youth, how can we actually get this to a wider audience? And so we decided to develop a video series around it. And in doing that, we sort of shifted the focus a tiny bit from, or I should say maybe widened it a bit. So it's not just focused on youth needs. We tried to make it so that it was accessible to a little bit of a wider audience. So it's still probably falling in around the, like older youth, young adults kind of target, but anybody who's kind of interested in, relief, development, justice, poverty, God, like they could do this video series with their small group and learn about this relational perspective on poverty. What does that mean for how we define poverty? Who are the poor? What does it look like to engage well? Really practical ways to take the next steps, and not in a particular area of poverty. So it's not coming from a okay, now come and sponsor a child through my organization. It's really focused on where do you see God working in the world around you, and where is He specifically inviting you into that. So hoping to equip people to enter well into what God is already doing around them.
That's excellent. I've seen one of the videos. It's excellent. The production is fantastic. You guys are funny and natural, and it really helps. In 5 minutes, I learned stuff, and I would consider myself knowledgeable in this area to a certain degree. So it's great content, and I would highly recommend everybody to go and check it out. It's at thereisjustus.com. Thereisjustus.com. A little play on justice and just us. I like that. I'm a dad, and so I like those kinds of word plays. How are people reacting? What kind of success are you seeing from people who've been in the workshops or watching the videos, Laura?
Yeah, we've had lots of really great feedback on it. And I think that this is something that in my world, a lot of people have recognized is something that youth and young people and people in general are really searching for right now. And people, do the workshop or see the videos, and a lot of these really complex issues that they've been wrestling with now have words and understandable words. And then they've got, a process to, we end the video series with really practical exercises about okay, what's next? How do you take the actual next step in this? Because learning is one thing, but if you don't do something about it, that it doesn't really mean a lot. And so people are really excited about they're being able to articulate and put language and words around some of these ideas that they've been wrestling with. And then how do they, practically take the next step? And we actually teach an exercise that's based on asset-based community development, which is a widely recognized tool in the international development world, a really simple version of that. And so it's an exciting listening and observing and participating exercise to equip people to really put some of this stuff into practice in either something that they're already involved in or something that's already existing in a partner organization or even just in their own communities. And so lots of really good feedback on it.
Wonderful. So good.
Like surprisingly so, because I started doing this, it was my first time doing like a video series like this, and it's a ton of fun, but I was like, what happens if it's no good? And then people are really excited about it, and that's really encouraging.
Good. Praise God. So, Laura, what should we do today? How can we act in response to all of this today?
It's a good question. I think one of the biggest things, and we've talked about this a few times during our conversation, is the ways that we experience poverty here are very different than the ways that we have often defined poverty in the past. And starting to be a little bit more self-aware and asking, okay, where do I experience brokenness in my life, and how can I be a part of reconciling some of that brokenness? And from a faith perspective, asking God those questions. Yeah. And that might be an area of brokenness in your own life, the way you view yourself, or it might be going next door and introducing yourself to your neighbor and moving into some of those areas of relational healing, or it might be actually acknowledging the person on the street as a person rather than as just a beggar. And then looking at the wider picture and thinking, okay, is there somewhere that God is really tugging at my heart? Do I need to change my purchasing patterns? Do I need to, sponsor a child? And in focusing on the relational perspective of poverty, in no way am I saying that people should not be giving money. There are huge needs in the world. And so if there are organizations that you know of that are doing really great work, asking how can you be involved, or your church, how can I be involved? And then as you start to know more of the story, more of the relational perspective, as that starts to make more sense to you, start to share that with people around you and challenge assumptions that are based on a faulty understanding of poverty. I mean, that's huge. The biggest thing is when we look at poverty, we often look at out there, those people out there, and we need to, maybe with a little bit more humility, ask ourselves, okay, me, where do I experience this brokenness, and where can I be a part of what God is doing to reconcile all things to himself?
Yeah. Laura, could you pray for us to have hearts that care and to have the compassion and the courage to do this, to become uncomfortable and to learn?
Yeah, for sure. I'd be happy to. Dear God, I want to thank you so much for this conversation and just the encouragement that it's been to me. And God, I pray for those who will listen to this. God, I pray that you would be stirring in their hearts and awakening desires open their eyes to the things that you're already doing all around them, God, because we know that you are active in the world around us. And we know that our healing is bound up with the healing of the nations in the world, God. And so we ask that you would give us eyes to see where you're working and where you are specifically calling us into that work, God. Give us the humility to know that you're not calling us into everything, but give us the wisdom and discernment to see the ways that you are calling us into things that you have gifted us in, and places where we can learn from people who experience brokenness in ways that are different than us, God. And like Jonathan said, if those are places that make us uncomfortable, and often they are, God, I pray that you would draw us into those places of discomfort so that we could get to know you, ourselves, the people around us, and your creation in a more holistic and healed way. God, equip us and give us humility and wisdom and courage to enter into this journey of reconciliation that you are leading us on. Yeah, God, and thank you for the things that you're going to do in our hearts and in the world through us by involving us in what you're doing, God. We know that these are big, big areas of brokenness, and you are the one who is faithful to do it all. And God, we just thank you that we get to be involved in that. We pray all these things in your name. Amen.
Amen. Laura, this has been a privilege. Thank you for sharing your heart with us, your understanding of the heart of God with us. And thank you for creating this resource with the guys and girls that you've worked with. Thank you for making the time. This has been wonderful.
Yeah, my pleasure.
Cheers. Hopefully we'll talk again soon.
Sounds great. Thanks.
Thanks for listening to the podcast. If you enjoyed this, if it spoke to you, then please would you consider sharing it with a friend? Head over to jonathanpuddle.com. You'll find links to my Facebook page, Twitter profile, our YouTube channel, which includes a whole bunch of stuff from my whole family as well. There's vlogs and all kinds of fun videos there. Spiritual stuff, non-spiritual, family life stuff, DIY videos. You can get to know us a little bit better. And while you're on jonathanpuddle.com, make sure you subscribe to get an email. I send it just once a week, and I include highlights from the blog, recent podcast episodes, videos, and just kind of the overview of what's going on the last week. Thank you, guys.